Welcome everybody, Nate Albaugh here, high school football coach here in Illinois, alongside a strength coach. Once again, this is week, oh man, I just forgot, 6 or 7. This is week 6 or 7. I've started a 12-week program here called the Power Hour. And the Power Hour is for one purpose. That's that I felt like I had not taken enough time to educate myself when it came to strength and conditioning and was really just winging it. As a former athlete and a coach and being around it all my life, I was winging it. It's time to stop winging it and learn. And alongside me today, today's expert, Missy-MacBeth, strength coach at Byron Nelson High School in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Welcome, Missy.
Thanks for having me.
And how long have you been the strength coach at Byron Nelson?
This is going to be my 5th year.
And do you do all sports there or sports specific?
I work with every sport. I don't coach a sport. I'm exclusively the full-time strength and conditioning coach there.
Wow. You know, I've been curious, strength and conditioning coaches, what's summertime obligations look like for a strength and conditioning coach?
We generally have, for us, we have groups in the morning, but our afternoons are pretty free.
So I'm assuming, but maybe I shouldn't assume, I'm assuming a strength coach is on as a certified teacher, or are you separate from teaching staff?
So I'm classified as a teacher, and I started my career as a high school biology teacher and volleyball coach. And so I already had that cert. But generally, most school districts in the state of Texas do require that you're going to be classified as a teacher, but I don't teach any classes.
Okay. Now, do you have the strength classes, though? I don't know how it works in Texas. I know every state is so different in how they arrange things. Do you teach, quote unquote, 5 strength classes, or how does it work there?
So the way that my job works, and kind of what you're referencing, are like, we have classes called strength and tone, but we have PE teachers that do that.
Okay.
I do have colleagues that are in nearby school districts, like 15 minutes away, that are responsible for a couple of those classes. But I don't have any. I do guard the pizzas during 6th period lunch. But other than that, I'm just a strength coach. I don't have to deal with classes or grades or any of those types of things.
Wow. Now, how common is that kind of setup in your area? I mean, you said that you have friends that are more like the teachers of the class. How many do you know of that are in your type situation that are more separated from the classroom?
So I work in a large school district with 3 high schools. And so there are 3 of us in positions exactly like mine. The rest of our area, I think we have, maybe just a handful of coaches that are full-time strength and conditioning, but most have classroom responsibilities. You'll see some in the Houston, Austin areas. It's a relatively new position, simply because, like you mentioned with yourself, it's always been something that's kind of thrown onto the individual sport coaches to take over. So they're kind of trying to transition it in, but financially, obviously it's not always possible. So sometimes they're having to serve the role as a teacher as well. I'm super fortunate that I don't have to do that. And to be honest, I came from the Division I level, and I wouldn't have taken the position had I needed to teach classes, because I'd already done that in my career. I was looking for just strength. So my position's really, I'm very grateful for that. No teaching responsibility in my position.
Well, it sounds like a really cool gig, a gig that just strength in general, I'm growing more and more interested in. So I'm really excited to hear from you today. You're going to talk about exercise progressions. And once you start speaking, I'll shut up and just let you run with it. But so most of us in this are football coaches, though this is on YouTube. So who knows who ends up watching this stuff, and the Power Hour itself hopefully is attracting coaches of all sports. What would you say is an advantage of having a strength coach? I feel like I have an idea of what this answer might be, but I would love to hear it from your perspective. What's the advantage of having a strength coach in your school?
Wow. From a starting point, it's a liability issue. The weight room can be the most dangerous room in the building, or it can absolutely be the safest, because if you look at well and properly progressed weight training programs, they are very low in injury. So that's number one, is just having, the liability aspect. The other thing is, it takes a lot of the burden off of coaches, and it allows them to devote more time to, developing their schemes, because that's their job. Like, your job as a football coach is to coach either your position, or if you're an OC, DC, whatever, like that is where your focus should lie. And so having a strength and conditioning professional takes that one little piece, because you're having to pick up the bus and teach a class, and all the many roles all the many hats that we have to wear. Having a me on campus allows you to do what your actual job is better. And it also gives you a person that has a more in-depth knowledge versus, a lot of times you have people that are just thrown into it because they like to lift. And so they're pulling stuff out of bodybuilding magazines or based on their personal experience, and they're not staying current with science. So having a full-time strength coach on campus gives someone that, like I'm a volleyball player, I was a volleyball coach. I know volleyball, but I don't know it to the level that I need to know it at this point to make my athletes successful. Same deal with a football coach trying to operate as this, or any sport coach trying to operate as a strength coach. You're just scratching the surface of what's out there versus a full-time strength coach can really, you're just maximizing athletic potential at that point.
Right on. I love hearing that, because I think that is something that obviously more and more schools are going to, and I would love to have that at our school, right? So hearing more and more arguments for it certainly helps our cause, and helping, who knows how many years it is till we get to that, but hopefully it's something that every school district is working towards. Well, without further ado, here on the Power Hour, I'm turning it over to you, Missy, and excited to hear what you got to say.
There we go. Okay, so like we mentioned, it's going to be over basic exercise progressions. Kind of how I came to this is, like I mentioned, I was a sport coach, and I just got thrown into the wolves of, you like to lift, so here's the weight room. And early on in my career, it's like I just throw kids under a bar because I knew we needed a squat, and I would get frustrated because they wouldn't execute it correctly. And for me, it's like, well, it's a squat. Like, what is your problem? And so I learned over time that, we're not dealing with, a lot of times we're not dealing with motivated kids. We're not dealing with athletic kids. We're dealing with everybody in the high school setting. And coming from the collegiate level, it's like I was working with the best athletes in the nation. And so coming back to the high school level, I've had to develop a series of progressions because we start our athletes in the 7th grade. We have a 6-year development strategy. And so we needed some kind of progressions to get them safely from point A to point B. The other thing is I'm working with our athletes, but our coaches have to act as my assistants. And so we needed a system in place that was easy for them to jump from exercise progression to exercise progression. So baby giraffes on roller skates is kind of my funny term for anybody and everybody that walks in the weight room. We're training. We all know that 7th and 8th graders are crazy. Freshmen in high school, their just little bodies are all over the place. Even through their sophomore years, they're just changing so much, and every day they can come in a little bit different. And so maybe you're at step 3 on the progression, but you might need to back it back down. So just kind of coming from the mindset of not everybody in your weight room needs to be doing the same thing at the same time, but we have to have a system in place to make that doable for us as coaches. So background, we already went through that. I'll just skip over that. My training philosophy, I think it's always relevant to start with that. Number 1 is reduce injuries. I should be do no harm as a strength coach. I shouldn't be causing injuries in the weight room, and I should keep our athletes healthy and on the field of play. Enhanced performance, obviously we want to be bigger, stronger, faster, the most effective football players, volleyball players, whatever sport we're playing. Educate our athletes. So I think this era of kid is different because they have the world at their fingertips. And so I think because of that, they're used to knowing why on things. And I think it's really important from a motivation standpoint that we explain to them why we're doing things a certain way. And particularly with these exercise progressions, I'll tell them, you're staying at step 1 because that's what your body's ready for, versus these guys over here are going up to step 2, just to help them understand why they might be doing something different than someone else. And then the last one's promote life skills. I think the weight room's a big piece of that. I think it's a great litmus test for character. I think it certainly is of a coaching staff, but just, teaching them be on time, focus, attention to detail, all the little intangibles that we want out on the field. I think we foster that environment in the weight room as well. So I'll just get right into it because we have a brief time period. Starting with the squat. I used to start kids with body weight, but I've actually gotten to where we're starting with a counter movement squat where we have a light implement in their hands. It could be a 5-pound plate. It could be a ball. So a football, just something to have them push their hips away from, just an external cue to have them work against. So We've got the plate in at their chest, all right? They're gonna initiate the movement with a hip hinge and drive their hips as far away from the plate as they can. Okay, so that'll be step one. Once they've mastered that and we've grooved that movement pattern, then we're gonna move into a goblet squat, all right? So we're incorporating a little bit more load and we're keeping the load in closer to their body so that they have to initiate the movement from their hips and establish more balance. From there, we're trying to progress into barbell exercise, obviously, because the name of the game is it's strength and conditioning, so we've got to get stronger. So we're gonna go into hands-free barbell front squat, all right? So this is gonna do a lot of things for us. We're gonna have them get it in the groove on the front side of their shoulder, step out away from the rack, and then they're gonna squat. Obviously, we can see if they drop their elbows that the bar is gonna roll down. So it's just giving them a really good external cue to keep their torso vertical and also keep those arms up. Because once we move into a front squat, we know, I'm not gonna go over cleans in this presentation, but we know we wanna catch a clean with the elbows up. All right, and part of that is teaching the front squat. And so then we're doing a barbell front squat in the rack position. So we've got the bar on the fingertips, but we've now established the elbows up position. And this is, if you can't tell, this is an old and decrepit athlete doing these things. Because this is me like in April or something of quarantine. I had to get a pass to get in the building to even film this stuff. Okay, and then the barbell back squat. Really the only sport that I use barbell back squat with is football. Our other sports, because they spend less time in the weight room. And then also I don't like back squats for female athletes for a couple reasons. But we generally don't progress our other athletes into a barbell back squat. Barbell front squat is usually their final resting place. So that's our squat progression. And with that, sometimes squats are a fairly complex movement, sometimes for kids. And so sometimes you're gonna have ones that, even a counter movement squat, right? They're just not getting it. So we might do a supported squat where they're holding on to either TRX straps, or they might hold on to the rack just so they can feel, you know, keeping their whole foot flat, sitting their hips back in a position where they have stability created by holding on to something. Sometimes kids just aren't comfortable because they feel like they're gonna fall over backwards. So we'll squat them to a box or a bench just to give them kind of that safety net. Very quickly, we're able to remove that once they figure out like they're not gonna topple over backwards and they figure out how to balance. But you do need some course of action when kids don't even fit into the low level progressions that you have. And then the broken skate crew, like your baby giraffe on roller skates has an injured toe or whatever it is. We have safety bars, so we'll do safety bar squats. And we also have something called a pitch shark, which is basically a belt attachment that they're able to squat and not put any load on their spine. So we do have different options for kids. And that was part of my weight room design, is I made sure to have things in place for particularly our football athletes, because we actually squat on Saturdays. Which is normally one day after the game. And so obviously you've got kids that are kind of nicked and banged up. And so you've got to have some options where, you know, the kid still needs to work out today. We just don't need to load his spine. So we've got a pitch shark there that he's able to use in the case that, you know, they've got some kind of little acute injury that's going to be gone by Monday. All right, our hip hinge progression, which is basically progressing into an RDL. Or you can progress into deadlifts, trap bar deadlifts, those kind of things. We're gonna start with a vertical PVC RDL. And so I have we've just started back in-person school. We've been going for 2 weeks. I have watched and coached this exercise 1,000 times in the last couple weeks. So I'm gonna pause right here. We're gonna place the stick behind their back, all right? You're gonna want the stick in contact with the athlete's body in 3 parts, or 3 spots. So it's gonna be back of their head, between their shoulder blades, and then on their tailbone, okay? And then they're gonna hold the stick where their spine naturally curves. So you're gonna have the hand behind the head, and then the hand behind the low back, okay? And the stick is just giving an external cue. So I've mentioned external cues a few times. Anytime you can give an athlete an external cue, research has demonstrated it's generally superior to an internal cue. A lot of that has to do with the fact that some of these kids have no idea where their body is in space, but they can tell you where that stick is, all right? And so we're wanting to give them an external cue to help them find this good hip hinge position, all right? So from there, we're gonna bend at the knees, all right? And then they're gonna hinge forward at the hip, maintaining those 3 points of contact with the stick, all right? So this one is something that your lower level kids are really gonna struggle on the first couple of sessions, but after a while they get it, all right? And it's something that's great because it's self-coaching, because they can feel if that stick comes off of there. They just have to figure out how to make their bodies move in contact with the stick. And it generally, I see maybe session 1 is a disaster, session 2 might be a disaster, but by the third one, they're really starting to get it. And then you can start progressing them from there. Then we're gonna put the PVC in a position that's more specific to what they're gonna be doing, which is holding it horizontal like you would for an RDL, okay? And again, all I've done is I've altered one variable, okay? It's easy to say like, oh, let me throw a bar in their hands or let me throw dumbbells in their hands. But the deal with that is now you've added weight to someone who has a very beginning stage movement pattern, okay? So you've changed bar position and you've changed load, right? So I try to just change one thing at a time, and I found that makes our athletes more successful. Okay, once we've gotten our hand position and we've got that good neutral spine position for a hip hinge, then we're gonna start adding a load. And I've got a remote control in my hand, so sometimes my hand looks a little bit weird during these videos. All right, so now we've added load. I'm demonstrating with a bar, but clearly in a barbell RDL, we're gonna wanna get pretty heavy with this. Okay, and then like I said, we'll progress into either a trap bar deadlift or a clean grip deadlift or a clean pull. Generally, my kids that pull from the floor on their power clean, so football and then my boys' soccer team, I'll progress them into a clean grip deadlift. My other sports, we progress into a trap bar deadlift because I just pull from the hang on my cleans. And again, that just kind of boils down to not just sport needs, but also football trains 3 times a week, sometimes 4. Most of my other teams train twice a week. But instead of going through that, because everybody knows what a deadlift looks like, everybody knows what a trap bar deadlift looks like, I chose to go with single leg RDL variations. These are actually really good for a lot of things: ACL injury prevention, balance, coordination, lots of stuff, but it's a very complicated movement. So we're gonna give them an external cue of the PVC held against their foot. Okay, they're trying to get to where they're almost parallel to the ground, keeping their hips squared forward. All right, and that stick is just gonna help them keep this straight line from head to heels on the RDL. And then we'll move into actually adding load. So I usually start, and you can see that rep, I kind of lose my balance a little bit, but I'll start with 2 dumbbells. And then we'll obviously increase load, and you can also go with a barbell. I think barbell is a little bit more difficult to balance, so that would be higher up in the progression. And just, this is far from comprehensive of like where we go with things or every single thing that I use, but just kind of a 5-step system for each of these 5 basic movement patterns. So our single leg movement. So we need to squat, but we also need to split squat and do lunges because most of sports occurs on a single leg. There's a big dichotomy in strength and conditioning. Like some people are getting completely away from bilateral exercises like squats. Some people want to only do single legs. Some people only want to squat. And it's like, well, let's just do both. So that's kind of my deal, is we're going to do both. So we're going to start with an isometric. All right. So let me go back to the start of this video. I start my kids on the ground. All right. So they can set up in their base position in a point of stability, because if you just have a kid like try to set up in a lunge, they're going to almost always have their foot placement out of position. Their torso placement is going to be all over the place. So we take a knee, all right, we get our front leg, we get our front shin vertical, and then we get up, set up with our hips stacked on top of our shoulders. Okay, from here, so we're starting at the bottom, I'll call them up, and they're just hovering the ground, and we're building time. We start with 10 seconds. I think we're up to 25 and 30 seconds per leg with groups at this point. Okay, from there, we're gonna go into a bottoms up split squat, again, starting from a position of stability in that known position on the ground. Uh-oh. There we go. And then we're gonna start from the bottom and stand up, all right? And then every rep will pause on the ground, stand back up. Okay, from there, we're gonna start top down and we're gonna go with eccentric. So the eccentric phase is the lowering phase, right? And we're gonna emphasize that. So I wanna say I've got like a 5-second eccentric here. So I'm gonna go slow down and then just a regular tempo up. So it's 5, 0 count at the bottom and a 1 tempo to the top. All right, from there, we're gonna start incorporating load. So we have our front rack position established with our front squats already, and we can go into a front rack split squat. And again, demonstrating with an empty bar, but we would want to load that fairly heavy. And then there's about 7,000 different ways you can progress into lunges and, you know, lots of types of lunges that you can do, but I just demonstrated two. One is a rear foot elevated split squat. If you don't have these utility pads, I have kind of a bougie weight room where I added all this stuff in, but you can use a bench or a box to support your back leg. Okay, so rear foot elevated or a reverse lunge. All right, a reverse lunge is just a more complex movement because you're adding movement to it instead of just staying in that same split stance over and over again. Okay, so push-up progression. If you turn kids loose and say do push-ups, like you get the grossest looking things on earth in most cases. You get like saggy low backs and they look like seals sitting up on rocks to me. Like they're just, it's terrible. So we start very slowly. We establish a straight line from head to heels using the high plank. All right, and we're just working on making sure that we've got the rib cage and the pelvis stacked and locked together, all right? So we're just gonna hold that for time, all right? And most of my teams right now, 2 weeks in, back in person, we're still doing a lot of high planks, and we're just building from 30 to 45 seconds. Okay, from there, we're gonna start working into eccentric push-ups, again, just emphasizing the lowering phase. A lot of times kids won't have the strength to hold their body in a good position for a regular push-up, but they can do it eccentrically. And I always give the disclaimer anytime you see me in videos, I have 2 blown out shoulders. So there's always gonna be something wonky with my push-up technique, but it is what it is. I had 1 athlete available during quarantine and it was me. So that's kind of what you get on videos. So then from there, if a kid's not strong enough to do a regular push-up, we're gonna elevate their hands, all right? That way they can still keep that straight line from head to heels, all right? And then from there, obviously, we're gonna do a regular push-up and you're gonna see my low back buckles just a little bit, but not terrible. All right, and then push-up variations. What did I pick? I think I picked a push-up to shoulder tap here. All right, so we're getting a push-up and then we're also adding anti-rotation to the core. But you can do push-up to dumbbell row, you can do a push-up to rotation, lots and lots of different ways that we do push-ups. Do we bench press? Absolutely, but we're just kind of going over, I'm not really gonna do like a big progression in the bench press, and probably everybody's talking about bench, so I always wanna talk about something hopefully a little bit different. And then we're gonna take the movement, we're gonna flip it upside down, all right? Because if we're training the front side of the body, we need to be training the back side, because the back side of the body is what makes an athlete an athlete. And so we're gonna do a reverse pull-up. Some people call these inverted rows. So this is a very extreme circumstance, the straight arm hang. If kids are not able to hold the second position, we'll just have them hang from the bar, all right, and just work on that grip strength. Most of the time, kids are able to hold our second step in the progression. And this is a very similar progression to what you could use with a traditional pull-up. We've started, like some of our female soccer players, they're just starting with hangs, all right? And then from there, we're gonna move into a jumping pull-up. And then from there, we'll move into a more strict version of the pull-up. But where we generally start with most kids is an isometric reverse pull-up. So we again have the rib cage and the pelvis stacked. I'm in a straight line from head to heels. I'm retracting my shoulder blades and we're gonna go with an underhand grip just because it's a more shoulder-friendly variation. Okay, then very similar to our other series, we're gonna do an eccentric reverse pull-ups. So the athlete's gonna come up, right, and they're gonna do a 5-second eccentric, just building that strength. If they're not able to bring themselves back up, we'll generally have a partner come behind them and spot them, or you can even hang a band from the top of the rack to help pull them back up. I don't like the band method so much just because you're losing something on the eccentric. So the partner method is usually good. From there, we're just going to go into a dynamic reverse pull-up. All right, so we're just squeezing our shoulder blades, touch and go on the bar. The entire movement's still completed under control. And then you can load it. You can put their feet up on the bench. There are very few kids, even our stronger, older boys, putting their feet up on the bench just turns into like really gross technique. So generally I like to load it. So I make this little Iron Man contraption with the with a plate and a band. You can do the same thing with the plate on your back. All right, and then just performing your movement with a little bit of load. What I actually like to do with this is a partner resisted eccentric. I couldn't even bring my husband into the building when I filmed these because it was like crazy coronavirus time. So I'll have the partner stand in front of them and put their hand on the athlete's chest and push. And then the athlete's going to resist that push as they lower down. All right, just again, adding more resistance to that eccentric phase to increase the intensity level. All right, our bracing progression. So for the core, so I am not a sit-up traditional ab crunch person. There's tons of research behind why that's bad for your back. Instead, we're going to teach our athletes how to brace. And the first step in that, and the very first thing that we do every day is we work on a breathing exercise. So this video is very non-exciting, but I'll show you the position that we set up in. We set up with our left hand on our chest, our right hand on our belly in a kind of glute bridge position. And I'm giving them that external cue of their hand and having them try to raise that belly hand as much as they can when they breathe before they raise that chest hand, right? So what we do is we do a 6 to 8 count. We inhale for a 6 count. We hold the breath for 2, and we exhale forcefully for 8. And we're going to do that 3 rounds every day before we start. We actually use, if you've had anybody on here talking about RPR, we use the RPR Zone 1 series. So we'll do our breathing exercises. We'll do RPR Zone 1, and then we'll hit our actual mobility warm-up. So we're going to start breathing as the first step in our progression, and also something that we do every day because there's a huge benefit to deep diaphragmatic breathing. And then we're going to put them in a position, because we're working into dead bugs here, so we're going to put them in a position that's more specific to what we want. So we still want to see that belly rise as they breathe. Very hard to see in the video, but we're going to put them with their arms up and their legs in a 90-degree position, because that's where they're going to start their dead bug. All right, so single limb dead bugs. So failed to mention on the last video, but what we want to see is no air between their spine and the ground. All right, so I'll even go and like slide my hand under them or try to stick a sheet of paper under their low back. We want to make sure that they're not arching their back as they're doing this exercise. So a lot of times kids are not able to move opposite arm, opposite leg at first without letting that low back pop up. So we'll go one arm at a time and then one leg at a time. And again, we're just trying to keep that same position in their core where they don't let any air behind their low back. From there, we're going to progress into a dead bug with contralateral limbs. So opposite arm, opposite leg. And then you can get online and probably find 50 dead bug variations. The one I chose here is a dead bug with a single arm reach. So we're actively pushing that dumbbell away from the ground. First rep is not so good, but the second one I actively reach towards the ceiling. The other benefit to that is I'm getting engagement in my serratus, which is a muscle that helps support with scapular positioning. So it's really important for shoulder health. Okay, so advantages of using progressions and regressions, I've kind of touched on them, but number one is safety. So we're not just throwing kids under a bar. It's something that, you know, the strength and conditioning community has been very outspoken in all of this return to play from COVID. And the concern has never been what happens in like the first 2 weeks. The concern is 6 weeks in, when we've loaded them too much in the first couple weeks, what happens to their little bodies. And so same thing in the weight room, like your athlete might look ready because maybe their muscles are okay, but the connective tissue is not ready to handle it, all right? So by progressing them super slowly, you're guaranteeing safety of the athlete. So we're going to slow cook this process. You can also individualize training. So in a single group, I may have a freshman who has never been in the weight room before, and I might have a senior who has been in the weight room with me for 4 years plus 2 years in middle school. And if my programming looks exactly the same for those two athletes, that's probably not a good indication of a safely progressed program, right? And so I need a quick way, because if we've got a group of 80 and we have 4 coaches, we don't have enough eyes to go and have, 80 different individualized programs. So we need a way to just blanketly apply a 4 or 5 step system to a group of 80 kids of 5 different levels. And so having a progressive system allows you to really quickly walk that line and say, you're counter movement squatting, you're goblet squatting, we're barbell front squatting. It also allows for efficient coaching because everybody's kind of on the same page with where we're going with the program. Also, anytime we're doing those ISOs and those eccentrics, you have more time each rep to coach that kid, right? Because again, we're working with really large groups. And so if you have a set of 5 and things are moving pretty quick, you might not get over to that kid. But if you have an ISO that you're holding for 30 seconds and everybody in the room is holding for 30 seconds, I can walk down the line and work with 15 different kids during that time period. And then also return to play after an injury. Not only sometimes does an injury make it where they just can't lift as much, right? So we can step them back to a previous level. It also gives us a system to communicate with our athletic training staff of, okay, little Johnny can't do barbell back squat today because he's 4 months post ACL. Can he goblet squat? So we're progressing him back into that. And so it's a really good method to use to come back from injuries. So kind of a timeline and what that looks like. This is very estimated. A lot of it depends on group readiness. My 7th and 8th grade programs, that's me communicating with the coordinators down there and saying, how do your kids look? Do you need more? Do you need less? Where do we need to go? But generally speaking, in the 7th grade, and we're again just using squats here, we're going to spend 6 to 12 weeks doing the counter movement squat, right? Because those are kids that it's week 3 and they already forgot their locker combination 6 times. They don't know what shirt day it is or whatever it is. So we have to just hammer those movements in, just like math class. If you want them to be good at something in math, you do it over and over and over and over again. And so we'll spend 6 to 12 weeks on that. And then we'll do 6 to 12 weeks doing a goblet squat, which is usually done in the gym with a 10-pound plate because we have groups of like 200 kids. And then we'll have a PVC pipe, right? And so we're doing that hands-free barbell front squat with a PVC pipe over their shoulder, right? Do we have 200 PVC pipes? Absolutely not, okay? What we do is we'll put them in lines and maybe we have 10 PVC pipes, all right? And the front row has the PVC pipe and they're doing the hands-free barbell front squat. The second one doesn't have the pipe, they're just doing an arms out front squat, all right? And then we'll pass that PVC pipe on back through the rows, right? If they're in the weight room and they have the little 15-pound bars, awesome, all right? But that's not always a reasonable setup. So you kind of have to go with what you got at the middle school level. Then Christmas break happens and they forget most of what they learned. So you have to go back through that movement progression. So we'll go back 2 weeks through counter movement squat. We'll go 2 weeks through goblet squat. We'll go 6 weeks hand-free front squat with like a 15-pound bar. And then if they look good, like the last 6 to 12 weeks of school, we might have them in a rack position doing a barbell front squat. All right, in the 8th grade, we're making the assumption that on the whole, they've done this stuff for a year. All right, so we're gonna do each movement for 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how they look and if they're ready. And then we'll get them to where, by week 7 or 8, they're already starting to do barbell front squat, and we'll start to incorporate a little bit of load as their body's ready for it. In the 9th grade, obviously every high school, we're going to have transfers and move-ins. So we're going to do a couple weeks at each step in the progression. The other deal with high school is you're now throwing on them, they're at a new school. It's their first time to go through high school practice in 2 days. They have a huge amount of stress on their bodies from different academics, they don't know where anything is. The building is huge. They don't know their teachers, any of that kind of stuff. So we try to minimize that stress early on. All right. And then we're going to bump up to barbell front squat and start loading that through the first semester. If they look good in the second semester of their freshman year, we'll add in the barbell back squat, but not until they're very proficient at that front squat. 10th grade, if they came to summer workouts, all right, we're basically ready to rock from the start, and we're either doing back or front squat depending on what day in the program. Kids that took the summer off, we're going to go back a couple weeks in each step of the progression, all right, just to make sure we're being safe. At that point, it's not my job to punish you for not being at summer workouts or to make you sore or crush you. It's my job to safely progress you back in whatever that looks like. By the 11th and 12th grade, generally those kids have the commitment level to have been there the entire summer. So again, we're just rolling at that point with our programming. And so that's really it. I've got my contact info up here, my website. I run a business called Safe Iron. And basically it's about teaching sport coaches proper movement progressions. I do custom training programs for teams. I come into schools and whatnot and look at their facilities. I can do it via Zoom as well. And then there's my email, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. So.
And we're going to head over for a quick commercial break. And when we come back, a little Q&A with Coach MacBeth.
Hi, I'm Dylan Mack. I'm one of the Chief Pigskin videographers. Been with Chief Pigskin since January, and it has been a blast. Meeting a lot of coaches through our online clinic, getting content out that way, or putting it on to our YouTube channel. Either way, it's been phenomenal. It's been a great experience. Being a head coach myself, being a head coach at Elmwood Park High School, just outside Chicago, it's been great to get to know the other Chief Pigskin videographers as well as Nate. And I just want to thank everybody for watching the Chief Pigskin TV. And I wish you all the best in your guys' seasons. And those of you that aren't in season right now, hope you're getting a tidbit or two to put forward once you guys get going in the spring.
Welcome back to the Power Hour. You just heard from Coach MacBeth out of Byron Nelson High School in Texas. And Coach, really impressive. I am so excited. I think I didn't realize how much was going on in the exercise science world with how slowly we can progress into these things. And I'm not going to lie, I think I was under the impression, and I think it shows just how clueless some coaches can be. So here I was coaching for almost 20 years and coaching football for almost 20 years. And I thought that I was a guy that went really slow. And right, we've had rule, for example, a generic rule in our program for our freshman football players was no wait till July, right? So all of June was bar only. And when I came in and I started doing this Power Hour, and I started seeing these progressions, I realized that true exercise science people are going even slower and going, there are steps before you even put a bar in your hand. And so it's just been, it's been very eye-opening to me. So I've got a handful of questions here, excited to ask you. And these questions might jump around a little bit, so they may not go in a real logical order. But I'm just gonna go in the direction that I've got in the order that they hit me here off my list. First of all, you said, let me start the most basic, because I'm not a strength person. I would love to become certified. That's kind of a 10-year goal for me, is at some point. I'd love to be able to do that. But you're using a lot of vocab that I've heard many times, and I don't know the definition. Can you tell me, and I feel silly asking this, but eccentric movement, can you explain that real fast, just so I know exactly what you're talking about?
Yeah, so movement is divided into, eccentric is basically when the muscle's lengthening. So you can think of that as like the descent phase of a squat or descent phase of push-up or lowering the bar down on the bench. The opposing movement is the concentric movement. So that's when the muscle's shortening.
Got it, concentric. And I couldn't think of the opposite of eccentric. Okay, so that helps. And I want to make sure I ask those questions because I have learned. If I'm wondering, there's usually someone else wondering. When it came to, I'm going to cross that one out here. You talked about the squat and the back squat. I've been concerned for a while that I feel like it's hard to, guys, I don't know if girls are the same way. I've really only been around males lifting because I have not been a PE teacher. I've only been a football coach, and those are the guys I'm around all the time lifting. But I have a really hard time getting the guys to take weight off the bar to do it correctly. It's hard, right? And when you're in there in the summer and there's 60 guys in the weight room, inevitably it's like you're constantly telling guys to get weight off the bar. Injury becomes a real thing. And now my own son just happened to have a squat injury recently. I'm starting to wonder, help me understand the advantages to back squatting and back squatting heavy, and how heavy do you need to go?
That's one of those it depends questions, which is one of the biggest cop-out answers ever, because then you never have to explain things. Advantages of back squatting versus front squatting is it's a more hip dominant movement. So it's going to recruit more of the posterior chain, so the glutes and hamstrings. The disadvantage is if you have a kid with longer femurs, so their upper leg bone, if you have, which is one of the reasons I don't like it for females, is because proportionately females tend to be longer in their legs. So if you have those situations, you've got taller athletes, or you have a kid with poor mobility, when they go to sit their hips back, they're actually going to fold forward in their trunk. And so then you have a huge risk of a back injury. So the advantage is, more muscle recruitment in the backside, which is what we want. The disadvantage is, I'm not going to say a higher injury risk, because if you have people performing the movement correctly, obviously there is no injury risk. But when you have kids doing it that don't have the mobility, which a lot of our kids don't, here we are sitting on this call for 45 minutes, where we spend a large portion of our day sitting. We sit kids in a desk. So their hip flexors are super tight, their ankles are tight, so they don't have the requisite mobility to even hit those movement patterns. And then we load it, and often there's disastrous consequences. As far as amount of weight that's enough, we are very strict with our depth and with our technique. I've also gotten into a lot of, instead of doing 1 rep max testing, we'll maybe do it once a year. We do a lot of 3 heavy doubles and triples, and I'll tell them to leave 1 in the tank, and I'll use that as a training max, and I'll establish their percentages off of that. But then I'll leave them, because sometimes percentages don't hit everybody perfectly on every given day. So I'll leave 1 set open. If they're really feeling good, they can go try to hit a new heavy double or triple that day. And so we're going to let kids get as strong as their form allows. I'm not going to cap them at, you're a 500-pound squatter, so you're done. If you have more in you, we'll go for it, but only within the confines of really, really clean technique.
How deep is deep enough for a squat? What do you coach? Or what is correct? What's correct?
Well, when we front squat ass to grass. And the reason for that is there's a lot of times when kids are catching power cleans, which I guess technically it's clean, but if they're catching it and they're catching a heavy rep, they're going to sit down in that lower position anyway. So we need to have strength and stability in that bottom position. For our back squats, I coach powerlifting depth, which our league and our high school league in Texas is hip joint below the knee joint. So they're slightly below parallel. And that's really, I like my kids below parallel anyway, because number 1, there's more posterior chain recruitment. And the other thing is that there's more shear force on the knee when a kid's right at 90 degrees than there is when they're below the knees. So that old adage of squats being bad for your knees has actually been completely debunked, or deep squats being bad for your knees. That's been pretty heavily debunked by research.
Okay. Awesome. I'm so glad I asked those questions. Those are things that are constantly in my brain when I'm in the weight room, and I've never taken the time to ask, how do you help? This is the next question I jotted down. Inevitably, I'll get a freshman, sometimes older than that, but you get the young man, and again, I'm sorry, I keep saying young man. Again, I've literally only ever trained male athletes being a football coach, but I always get the young freshman boy, or 2 or 3 some years, that, usually overweight and you can't squat at all, cannot keep heels on the ground and get much more than 6 inches deep. My struggle with those young men is, how do I help get them correct without embarrassing them? I feel like it's embarrassing to be that kid that never gets to. Do you have any thoughts along that line? Or is it just maybe these progressions, knowing that when everybody is doing goblet squats, that it's less of that calling us or singling a kid out?
Yeah, so I think that actually raises a good point. And I think that boils down to your weight room culture of progression and need-based. But I will tell you, even though I always make the joke that like kids want to be a special snowflake until you start treating them like one. And then all of a sudden they're mad because they're not getting to do what everybody else is doing. And it's like, you can't have it both ways. Like you either want to be an individual with special treatment or you want to be just like everybody else. And so we really try to create that culture of like, this is where you're at, this is where we're trying to get you to. And then also comes into the education of piece of, yeah, we can let you do what everybody else is going to do, but here are the potential consequences for you. And you'll still have to, like, if you give them their little step in the progression for that day, they're going to do it with the coach there. And then if you turn your eye for 1 second, you'll look over and they're back under that bar. So you then have to go and pull them out. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a delicate balance of like not humiliating the kid, but still we can't let the kids, I guess, ego, just like we can't let our own ego as coaches get in the way of, what's best for the kids. So ultimately you just have to have that conversation with the kid of like, look, here are your consequences. Here's why we're doing this. And always try to find, instead of finding the things that they can't do, we always try to find them something that they can do and really praise them for the thing that they can do and do really well. Because, I had a kid that was just absolutely horrible at trap bar deadlift, but the kid could split squat really well. And so, in times where I needed a split squat demonstration, like I would use that kid and like really build them up that way. So that way they felt like they were contributing, even though maybe they were doing something a little bit different than other people.
Great. Appreciate that insight, Coach. Coming down my list here, how do you, as a strength coach, so as a football coach, and I think everybody's hard on themselves, you measure yourselves by wins and losses. As a strength coach, how do you measure success? How do you measure a successful year?
Well, we won a state volleyball championship last year, so that was cool. But we also had some teams that sucked it up. So, yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that. I mean, I try to evaluate my program from the standpoint of, are we getting stronger? Are we getting faster? A lot of it for me, because I am so big on technique, is eye testing. Seeing not just what the movements look like, but also what the kids are looking like start to finish. I remember when I first got to Byron Nelson, our kids were very like soft and doughy looking. Like I felt like even our like jacked kids, like I felt like I could just go like that to their arm and like make a 2-inch indent. And it's like after we started really training and progressing, they started to like get more dense in their muscles and that kind of stuff. And I don't want to boil it down to aesthetics, but obviously you're going to look at your numbers, you're going to look at your rep maxes and make sure everyone's getting stronger and faster and all those things. Because the reality is that there are some truly, and I've seen them, I've seen some truly horrible strength and conditioning programs produce very high caliber programs. But sometimes athletes succeed in spite of their training, not because of it. Which is where I think it's a real slippery slope to try to model your program after like whatever college or, whoever you saw was successful. So I really boil it down to, did the kids get better? What's our weight room culture like? Are kids generally doing what we're asking them to do? They're focused, start to finish. Like maybe, like we've got kids that are space cadets when they first come in, and by the end of it, you're seeing some leadership skills out of them. So I think it's a very multifaceted evaluation system that I don't think I have really one answer I could pinpoint.
Well, I got just a couple questions left here. This comment, not comment, what's the word? Quote. This quote you kind of breezed over. You said this, and it caught my attention. You said the backside is what makes an athlete an athlete. And I just want to kind of explore that. Like, what does that mean and why?
Yeah, so mirror muscles is what everybody, that's what kids want to go in and train, but really glutes and hamstrings, that's where all the power in your body comes from your hips. And so having a strong backside glutes, and as my friend, I've got a friend named Kyle Keese that works up at Denton Geyer, and his one-liner is, we're in the business of building ass. Because that's what makes you stronger, jump higher, be more explosive. The mirror muscles in front, they look good and they have their function, but it's those big muscles in your upper back and your glutes, hamstrings that are where all your athleticism comes from.
I like that. I like that a lot, Coach. All right, coming down into my last couple questions. the dead bugs thing. So the whole dead bug thing and the sit-up thing, those, I've never heard those things before. Never. So excited to hear that. And you called it bracing. Help me understand, because again, when you first said bracing, I pictured, you know, like catching something or catching myself against why I didn't know. Help me understand what that bracing progression is and how the word bracing fits into that. And then I have a dead bug question at the end too, but
okay.
That's brand new to me.
It's kind of all built around the concept that traditional ab training is all about flexing and extending the spine, which is actually what we don't want to do in sports. The muscles of the core, so we're not just talking abs, we're talking back muscles as well, diaphragm and your pelvic floor. You basically have a cylinder of muscles that's designed to act as a brace for your spine. So a belt, basically.
Yeah.
And so we want to teach athletes to use those core muscles as a belt, because that's where, if you don't have the ability to brace your spine, that's a massive, not just an injury risk, but it's also an energy leak. And so you're not going to be able to generate the same force, velocity, strength, any of those things as if you were able to brace that core and support your spine.
I like that. See, again, I go back and forth. I get excited and then I feel ashamed, and then I get excited, I feel ashamed. And I've done this for 20 years, and very seriously, I've been very serious about my coaching and getting better. And I look at, I can't believe I've gotten this far without really researching all of this. So I'm so thankful. Hopefully there are other coaches kind of taking this journey alongside of us.
So a really good resource on that topic is a book called Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance by Stuart Mcgill. He's one of the leading spine experts in the world. And I don't think that I knew about this stuff until probably 2010, because I was still doing crunches and sit-ups and all that. Because like you want to do abs and keep your abs strong. But then I learned about, his concepts and whatnot and never looked back.
On that the last, you had everything, by videos. On that last one, I'd never heard of a dead bug, never seen one. I 100% expected to do this, right? Like I thought you did what'd you call it? Counterlateral. You did counterlateral. And I was just expecting to go all the way extended and all the way up. And instead there was a weight in your hand and one arm went back and the other one reached. So I was really surprised by that. What is the function of that weight, having that there? Is it, if you're a big, strong kid, do you want to try to hold more weight? What's the function? What's going on there?
So the weight is me sneaking in both varying the movement, but also sneaking in an active reach. I kind of mentioned it, but blew through it. You have the muscle in bodybuilders that looks like gills right here under their armpits is the serratus anterior. And it attaches into your shoulder blade, and it helps the shoulder blade move properly so that you can get your arm up overhead. Football, we know, is a huge shoulder injury sport. And so incorporating those active reaches will help engage that serratus anterior, and it's just good for overall shoulder health. So on the surface, it's like, oh, we're just doing a core exercise and here, hold this weight, but I'm really sneaking in something else without having to necessarily do a separate movement for the serratus.
So of all that movement, what is technically, or what is known as a dead bug? What's part of all that?
Well, I guess step 3, where they're doing the contralateral movement.
Contralateral.
But like you said, you're expecting to see the arms go back. You can also do dead bugs that way, where you're moving both your arms and legs at the same time. But obviously, because there's more load at that point, that would be a higher step in the progression. Okay.
All right. Sometimes these questions are hard to ask. And I think I didn't ask them for so long because I just wanted to feel like I was official, right? Or of course I know this, of course I'm doing this at a high level. And I think eventually I just got old enough. I was like, I guess I don't care anymore. I've got to ask these questions. I've got to look dumb for a moment, and I got to be willing to not know. And I don't know all these things. So this has been really good for me. I had a couple other little things here, but I can live without asking those right now. Coach, you just did a great job. Really appreciate your time. Any closing thoughts here as we get ready to sign off?
I guess just kind of tying on to what you just said, like it happens to everybody, even experts. I'm sure you've had somebody come on and talk about like the Feed the Cat speed system. And so that's something that until I actually, because of my role, I have 13, there's 20 different teams going at any given time. Both my weight rooms are full, so I'm not on the field a lot. So I don't do a lot with speed development anymore. And so all anybody's talking about is feed the cats. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. And so I finally had to just like humble myself and go ask one of my friends. And they're like, oh, well, here's this video. And I watched it and I was like, oh, like, I don't know the name for it, but I know what it is. So
Yeah.
I think the moral of that is just, yeah, like you said, like be old enough or maybe humble enough that you're willing to admit what you don't know and stay in your lane. I think that's the whole, I think if there was a battle cry for the strength and conditioning industry, it would absolutely be for, you know, for coaches to stay in their lane and ask what they don't know, because we could all collectively make athletes a lot better if we had more people willing to say that I don't know what I don't know and go out and find it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. And I think as a coach, whatever sport you coach, it depending on the community that you're in or the area of the country that you're in or the size of the school, you can end up wearing many of these hats. You can wear the hat of the strength coach as the speed coach. You're also the football coach. You're also the baseball, right here, all these coaches. And it's important for anyone, myself, I've learned this, to go, you know what, I'm really focusing all my energy in this lane as a coach, and I'm not exploring the others. So while some schools are in a situation where they have a strength coach, so they don't have to worry about it, other schools are in a situation where I am the strength coach, so I better take some time to go learn about it. And so much has changed. Oh my goodness. You know, I graduated college in 2000. And I was a college athlete and we were training hard. And I thought what we were doing was pretty good, but the amount that things have changed in 20 years, I think it's pretty mind blowing. I mean, I feel like it's come as far as, you know, again, I got my first cell phone as a senior in college. I feel like that the technology boom is right along the same lines of the exercise science boom. In your opinion, this is my last question, I promise. In your opinion, like what's next in the exercise science world? Is there a next frontier?
I think you're kind of already seeing it. And I think a lot of it is technology, whether it's wearable tech for athletes. Like you're even seeing that trickle down, you know, like our high school, our girls soccer team is very high level. And we have, I think 10 catapult units that track their speed and recovery and all that kind of stuff that they wear that our coaches break down. And then just having, I have a friend who runs a software program that has, you know, now on platform analysis. And so it video records and does a movement analysis and there's programming information in it. And you're already starting to see a lot. I think we're just going to learn how to use those things to do more individualization for athletes versus cookie cutter programs. And again, at the higher levels, there's already a lot in use. I'm currently trying to lobby for some tech myself for our high school athletes. And I think that that's going to be a game changer for everybody, just from an efficiency standpoint, from an individualization standpoint, and then from a research standpoint of knowing, getting your data more efficiently and being able to implement, you know, your findings in a quicker time frame.
Well, great job today, Coach. And again, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to pick your brain, and I really appreciate it. You guys at home, hey, subscribe, like the channel. I think I said that backwards, but you know the drill, and we would appreciate your support. Look up Coach. Coach, how can they find you on Twitter?
Great question. My handle is I'm going to pull it off my phone right now. I know my web address. My web address is safeirontraining.com. And my Twitter handle is @Miss, so MISSE MITCHE11. So @Miss E Mitchell, but the ones instead of the L's.
Got it. Or you can also find her school at BNHS_strength. You could find her there as well. Great job today, and best of luck to you in the future, Coach.
Thank you for having me.